Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Ayman Nazir and welcome back to Knowledge Realm. Students, we are preparing for CSS examination and these days we are covering pre-partition history of Pakistan from the book Trek to Pakistan by Ahmed Saeed, recommended by FPSC. Today, students, we are going to cover two very short topics of pre-partition history of Pakistan, that is Delhi Muslim Proposals and Salmon Commission of 1927. So stay focused and let's get started. We are going to start with the Delhi Muslim Proposals of 1927. Here is the brief introduction. Students, Delhi Muslim Proposals were proposed by Muslim leaders. It was actually a formula for Hindu-Muslim unity. Muslim leaders presented some demands before Hindu leaders, and they expected that if these demands are accepted by Hindu leaders, the friction between Hindus and Muslims would be reduced. Indian National Congress welcomed these proposals, but the opponents did agenda, and more importantly, press did agenda, and the proposals were rejected. So we have studied the brief introduction of the proposals. Now we're going to study the detailed story of Delhi Muslim proposals. Students, at the outset of Khilafat movement, Hindus and Muslims decided to be united against British government for good. But by the end of the Khilafat movement, the unity started collapsing and a long bloody chain of riots started. Riots erupted in different areas, but most importantly in Multan, Saharanpur and Kohat. Studies show that in about 5 years, that is from 1923 to 1927, there were 117 riots which took a toll of 450 lives. And to add fuel to fire, Hindus such as Pandit Madan Mohan, Lala Lajpat Rai and Shardhanan started movements like Shuddhi and Sanghatan. Students, these two movements were anti-Muslim movements and Hindu leaders tried to instill hatred among Hindus against Muslims. Shuddhi means purifying, and Hindus started this to reconvert the revered Muslims back to Hinduism. They were actually forcefully converting the newly revered Muslims back to Hinduism. Then Sanghatan was another anti-Muslim movement. Sanghatan means binding, and it was meant to create solidarity among Hindus against Muslims. Hindus were trained to use sticks and pieces of bricks against Muslims during communal riots. And students, Muslims at the time were trying to retaliate to movements like Shuddhi and Sanghatan. Dr. Saifuddin and Mir Ghulam founded organizations like Tanzim and Tabligh in order to protect Muslims from the anti-Muslim movements started by Hindus. It was an era of communal riots in India, and leaders were trying to come up with a solution of the problem and remove the disunity between Muslims and Hindus. Students, it is very interesting and important to know that Quaid-e-Azam advocated the unity of Hindus and Muslims very devotedly. He was of the view that Muslims and Hindus should get united because without this unity, neither of the nation would ever be able to free India from British. He used to say that the establishment and continuation of the foreign rule in India was the direct outcome of disunity among the Hindus and the Muslims. Moreover, Sarojini Naidu called Quaid-e-Azam ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. So Quaid-e-Azam did efforts to unite Hindus and Muslims. Then in 1927, when there were communal riots in India between Hindus and Muslims, 30 Muslim leaders met in Delhi and came up with a formula for Hindu-Muslim unity, which was named Delhi Muslim Proposals. So this was the detailed story of the background of Delhi Muslim Proposals. Students, according to Hindus, the right of separate electorate was the main obstacle in Hindu-Muslim unity. Leaders were trying to find a solution of the communal rights. Quaid-e-Azam was working earnestly for the unity of the two nations. In 1927, Kayat was in Delhi. He invited 30 Muslim leaders who prepared the formula for Hindu-Muslim unity. Students, Muslims, in order to get united with Hindus and stabilize the social condition of India, got ready to forego the demands of separate electorate. But they presented some demands in front of Hindus and said that if the demands are accepted in its entirety, they would forego their rights of separate electorate. Their main aim was to protect the rights of Muslims. So to protect the rights, they came up with a new solution and became ready to forego the right of separate electorates. The demands are enlisted here. Students, first, Muslims demanded that Sindh should be separated from Bombay Presidency and constituted as a separate province. Sindh was merged with Bombay in 1884. Now students, here just try to analyze these demands and try to understand that why Quaid-e-Azam got ready to forego, to sacrifice the rights of separate electorate. But he presented these demands in return and wanted Hindus to accept these demands if they wanted Muslims to quit on the demand of separate electorate. Well, students, these demands were actually equivalent to the right of separate electorate. Just try to understand these. Quaid-e-Azam demanded that Sindh should be separated from Bombay Presidency. Well, Sindh was populated by Muslims majorly, and Quaid-e-Azam thought of protecting the rights of Muslims of Sindh by asking for the separation of the province completely. That way, there would be no need of separate electorate in Sindh, and the province would be entirely of Muslims. Another demand was the formation of Legislative Council in NWFP and Balochistan. Again, Muslims were in majority in these two areas, so Quaid-e-Azam wanted legislative councils in these two provinces also. Then, 1/3 seats in the central legislature were demanded to be reserved from Muslims. These were the demands presented by Muslims in Delhi Muslim proposals. Students, these demands were presented just to protect the rights of Muslims. Quaid-e-Azam knew that our main aim is not the right of separate electorate, but our main aim is to protect the rights of minorities. So we can protect it in any other way. Rights of separate electorate is not the only solution. So he adopted a new way. Muslim leaders adopted a new way. Students, before moving further, we should study the view of Quaid-e-Azam on Hindu-Muslim unity and why Quaid-e-Azam got ready to sacrifice the right of separate electorate. Students, Quaid-e-Azam always advocated the unity of Hindus and Muslims. He believed that Hindu-Muslim unity is essential if Indians want British out of the country and rule India by themselves. He said that the establishment and continuation of the foreign rule in India was a direct outcome of disunity among the Hindus and the Muslims. But he did not want this unity at the cost of the rights of Muslims. He did efforts to unite the two nations as well as to protect the rights of Muslims. And students, about separate electorate, Quaid-e-Azam was not adamant at this right. He believed that his main aim was the protection of the rights of minorities. He used to say that separate electorates are not the end but a mean to end. So we must not settle in hurry and can find other solutions also to protect the rights of Muslims. Then Muslim leaders presented Delhi Muslim proposals, and they were ready to forego the right of separate electorate because their main aim was the protection of the rights of minorities. And Delhi Muslim proposals were another solution, another formula for the protection of rights of Muslims. Students, Muslim leaders presented some demands, and the demands were called Delhi Muslim proposals. And these demands were welcomed by Indian National Congress, Pandit Motilal Nehru called them the best means to check communal rights and convinced Indian National Congress for the acceptance of the proposals. But some of the people from Congress opposed the proposals. Hindu Mahasabha and Hindu press did agenda the proposals, and Motilal Nehru were criticized bitterly. The Hindustan Times commented that Delhi Muslim proposals is like heads I win, tails you lose. It tried to express that the proposals imply that Muslims played with words. And Hindu accused that it is an effort to incite nationalism in minorities. The Congress Working Committee changed the decision to accept the proposals after 6 months. All India Muslim League was also divided into two on the question of separate electorate. It was divided into Shafi League and Jinnah League. So in addition to Hindu leaders, some of the Muslim leaders also rejected the proposals. Mian Muhammad Shafi of Lahore started propaganda against these proposals. Muslim leadership of Hindu majority provinces also rejected the proposals. Some leaders opine that under joint electorate, the chances of friction would multiply. Muslim leaders held a meeting and adopted a resolution. They described that replacement of separate electorate is premature. It called upon the British government to introduce reforms at once in NWFP and to separate Sindh at once from the Bombay Presidency. However, the proposals were eventually rejected by the Indian National Congress. But students, these proposals shows that there was a strong desire in the heart of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah to unite the two nations of India even in the most difficult times for the betterment and for independence of India from British government. Now students, we are going to start the second topic of this lecture. This is Simon Commission of 1927. Here is the brief introduction of the commission. Students, it was a commission chaired by Sir John Simon. Its task was to assess the performance of Montego-Chelmsford Reform of 1919. It introduced constitutional reforms in India. It consisted of 8 members including the chairman, Sir John Simon. It did not have any Indian member in the commission, and this is the reason that it sent a wave of shock and aggression in Indians. It was boycotted by Indians ferociously because Indians felt that it is an insult for themselves that the commission does not have even a single person that could represent Indians and that could present the demands of Indians. Simon Commission visited India 2 times. It did its work and it gave a report in May 1930. And as a result of the commission, Indians were given the chance of formulating their constitution themselves for the very first time. So students, we are done with the brief introduction of Simon Commission. Now we're going to study the detailed story of Simon Commission of 1927, and we're going to start with the background of this commission. Well students, we have studied in a previous lecture that in 1919 Montego-Chelmsford reforms were introduced in India. These reforms presented a bicameral legislature in India. And the most important feature of these reforms was a system of diarchy at provincial level. If any of you wants to study the Montego-Chelmsford reform in detail, you can go into the playlist of Pakistan Affairs in my channel and very easily find the lecture on Montego-Chelmsford reforms. So Montego-Chelmsford reform were introduced in 1919, and a system of diarchy was introduced in these reforms by Montego and Chelmsford. And the system was introduced at provincial level. Now what is a system of diarchy? Students, it is very simple. I have added this diagram here. Diarchy was introduced at provincial level. First of all, I have explained that a bicameral central legislature was introduced. Then a system of diarchy was introduced. Students, the subjects were divided into two. First of all, some subjects were given to center and some were given to provinces. The subjects of center were revenue and the foreign affairs and the railway. I cannot remember exactly, but there were some subjects reserved for central government and some subjects were given to provincial government. For example, health, education, police, forestry. As I can remember, I do not remember exactly, but some subjects were given to provinces. Then diarchy was introduced at provincial level. What does it mean? It means that at provincial level, these subjects were further divided into two. There were transferred subjects and there were reserved subjects. Transferred subjects were transferred to the ministries of provincial assemblies. But reserved subjects were reserved for the British government. And these subjects were given to Indian civil services. Students, don't forget that the subjects transferred to ministries were the subjects that consumed money, that required money. But the subjects that were reserved by Indian civil services produced money. These were revenue generating subjects. So this was the clever behavior of British, that they divided subjects in this manner. At provincial level, British introduced a system of diarchy. So students, Montego-Chelmsford reforms were presented in 1919 and it was stipulated that after 10 years the performance of the reforms would be assessed and new reforms would be introduced. But political situation in India forced British government to conduct the reforms before the completion of the time period of 10 years. And the act was amended and the word of after 10 years was replaced with within 10 years. Well, students, it's not just about the political situation of India. British had reasons of its own to perform the assessment before the completion of time period of 10 years. There were two major reasons. First of all, in 1929, there were elections expected in England, and the Conservative Party wanted to use the issue of India in its own favor. It tried to pacify Indians by conducting this assessment before 10 years, and it tried to show to English people that yes, the Conservative Party of England has tried to solve the issue of India to win the support of English people. Another reason was that Indians were demanding constitutional reforms. Indians and more importantly Hindu leaders were pressurizing British for constitutional reforms. Then on November 26 of 1927, the British government appointed a committee. Sir John Simon chaired the committee of 7 English people, and its task was to assess the performance of Montego-Chelmsford reforms in India and introduce new constitutional reforms also. So students, we have studied a brief introduction and background of Simon Commission. Simon Commission came to India in February of 1928. But the reactions of Indians on the appointment of Simon Commission was not positive. Indians reacted negatively. But why they reacted negatively? Why they protested against Simon Commission? Why they chanted the slogans of Simon go back? Well, students, British did a very grave mistake in appointing Simon Commission. All the 8 members of the commission were English. British did not bother to include even a single local Indian politician in Simon Commission. There was no Indian in the commission that could represent Indians or that could present the demands of Indians. So this is the thing that agitated Indians. It sent a wave of shock and aggression in India. Political leaders boycotted it. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah said the Jallianwala Bagh was a physical butchery and the Simon Commission is the butchery of our souls. Quaid-e-Azam also boycotted it. In fact, most political leaders of India boycotted Simon Commission. Simon Commission visited India twice and both times it was boycotted by Indians. Press also criticized the commission. Students, Indians were of the view and they were infuriated because they believed that British has insulted Indians by not adding even a single Indian politician in Simon Commission. But let's see how British defended its act of appointing all the English people in Simon Commission. British said that 2 or 3 Indians cannot represent interest of multi-ethnic India, and adding people from all communities would make it impossible for commission to function. This was the argument of British in their defense. But students, there were some people who were in favor of Simon Commission. First of all, it was Mian Muhammad Shafi. He was in favor of the commission, and after Simon Commission, the rift between Shafi League and Jinnah League widened further. Mian Muhammad Shafi was of the view that we should cooperate with the Simon Commission and we should put demands in front of the commission. We should not waste this opportunity. Then Paisa Akhbar of Punjab was also in favor of the commission. Nawab Ismail Khan was also in favor of the commission. Nawab Ismail Khan said a very wise thing. He was very sagacious. He said something that is very interesting. Well, he said that if the Indians did not consider it an insult that British Parliament had the right to formulate their constitution, why had they become so outraged on a minor issue of not including Indian representatives in the Simon Commission? Now, this is very interesting to know what Nawab Ismail Khan said. He's saying that Indians are not feeling any insult at the fact that British Parliament is formulating a constitution for them, for India. But they are feeling insulted at the fact that they are not including Indian in the Simon Commission. This is very interesting to know that Nawab Ismail Khan said something like this. And it is very eye-opening also. Students, Simon Commission paid 2 visits to India and was boycotted both the times. And in May 1930, it gave its report. And the report recommended these things that I've mentioned here. First of all, the report said that the diarchy should be abolished. It did not perform very well. Then, federal system should be introduced in India. Then Simon recommended further that right to vote should be extended to more people. Now, these points are very positive and very good for Indians. Then another point that is again positive, he recommended that an expert committee should be constituted for separation of Sindh and Bombay. Now this point explains that Simon also recommended the separation of Sindh and Bombay. But students, there was hostility for the Muslim demand of separate electorate in Punjab and Bengal. Quaid-e-Azam expressed dissatisfaction over the report. Muslims rejected the report. According to Allama Iqbal, a death blow has been struck at the Muslim majority in Punjab and Bengal. The report tried to deprive Muslims of the right of separate electorate in the province where they were in majority. So this is something that Muslim leaders did not like. Students, we have studied in detail about Simon Commission, its brief introduction, what was the background, what was the main task of this commission, how Indians reacted to the commission, what was wrong with the commission, why Indians reacted negatively, and what were the main features of the report presented by Simon. Now we're going to study the impacts of the commission. Students, first of all, Muslim leaders started agitation against the report because the reports expressed hostility against the Muslim right of separate electorate in Punjab and Bengal. Then another impact, Birkenhead challenge was extended as a result of agitation of Indians on Simon Commission. Lord Birkenhead, who was Secretary of State at the time, challenged Indians that why don't they constitute a constitution for themselves if they're not liking the constitution presented by British government. So this was challenge extended by Birkenhead. It was an impact of Simon Commission. Then it gave Indian leaders a chance to formulate a constitution of their own for India. After this, Nehru report was presented, and the report was presented as a result of Simon Commission in 1928. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah gave 14 points in response to Nehru report. So students, these were the impacts of the commission. We studied the Delhi Muslim proposals and Simon Commission in detail today. This is the end of this lecture. I hope I tried to explain everything in a simple manner. I tried to make things simple and easy for you. And I hope that whatever I explained here today, all the listeners got it very explicitly and very easily. So this is the end of this lecture. Inshallah, in next lecture, we would study Nehru report and 14 points of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Till then, stay focused on your studies, your goals. Thank you and Allah Hafiz. And don't forget to subscribe the channel.